Welcome to the Robotics Through Science Fiction podcast. I'm Robin Murphy, and in this episode, I will review Only Human, Book 3 in the Themis Files by Sylvain Neuvel. I recommend skipping this book so that you can retain your fond memories of the first two volumes, Sleeping Giants and Waking Gods. Though, if you must read it, think about how you would have used schemas to program Themis rather than how in the book it unrealistically relies on operators. Only Human is the disappointing end of the popular Themis Files series. The series started strong with its first book, Sleeping Giants, describing the somewhat unrealistic but cool giant piloted mecha robot named Themis discovered by the world's blandest female scientist. The second volume, Waking Gods, came up with a clever genetic engineering twist as to why there was an alien robot left behind on Earth. The third volume, Only Human, is basically a preachy political lecture on discrimination, displaced persons, and how power corrupts, sort of a mini version of the themes introduced in the Hunger Games, which refers to, but presented in the World War Z oral history format and populated with Buddhist aliens. Sadly, the Pacific Rim-like robots in the Themis Files are now treated like a car or a weapon, more like incidental props than making any real contribution to either the science or the fiction narratives. Only Human is also handicapped by the loss of key characters from the first two books and the increased focus on Eva, the world's whiniest adolescent. Check out my earlier reviews of Sleeping Giants and Waking Gods and the review of Exoskeletons for Science Robotics. Only Human is chock full of annoying inconsistency. For example, robots that can't right themselves after falling down but can translate thousands of miles in a blink of an eye. If locomotion is the first thing you want a robot to be able to do on its own, self-righting is the second. It reminds me of the joke by Erma Bombeck that motherhood was the second oldest profession for a woman. You do one, you get the other. In real life, robots have been self-righting since the late 1990s and use autonomous subroutines, functions, macros, whatever you want to call them, to perform these muscle memory types of movements. These muscle memory packages of software are often called schemas by roboticists. The term schema came from biology and psychology, where they were originally used to describe patterns of activity or behavior. In the classic reference book, Behavior-Based Robotics by Ron Arkin, robot behavioral schemas consist of a motor schema and a perceptual schema. The motor schema is the pattern of activity associated with the output. One example of a motor schema is gait in legged robots, and in my review of Pacific Rim, describe how animals like horses control multi-leg gaits through a neurophysiological loop called a central pattern generator. The CPG for a gait would be a motor schema. What is particularly interesting about CPGs is they're reflexive. If you trigger the motor schema, the gait begins executing footfalls without any conscious thought, just like the horse was an industrial pick-and-place robot. Thus, the computational burden is quite low. Even better, though, if the horse couples the CPG with an independent perception module, that is a perceptual schema, such as sensing the terrain, the horse can dynamically tweak the footfalls to compensate for rocks, slopes, obstacles, that sort of thing. The motor schema and the perceptual schema come together to form the behavioral schema for that gait, say the trotting behavior. But one interesting property of CPGs is that the perceptual schema can be null. Say the horse's eyes are injured, and the trotting behavior would still work, just not as well. Schemas are one way that biological intelligence exhibits modularity to produce robustness, just the way good software is broken into objects. I was part of the DARPA program that developed the Hurt Locker style of robots. These smaller suitcase-sized robots would be used in difficult tight situations, and the operator would often get them stuck. Due to limitations in sensor placement, it was difficult for the operator to infer what was the problem and how to extricate the robot. But it was easy for the robot to execute a self-routing routine and get unstuck by itself. Something like, try the flippers. If the flippers can't move, back up. Try the flippers again. Repeat, but go back further. Turn, repeat, and so on. Basically, the robot flailed around like an insect until it tumbled back upright and then returned control to the operator. Unfortunately, the military said it didn't want robots with any autonomy, confusing control autonomy, or automation, with political autonomy, which implied that the robot could disobey orders or come back in time to kill Sarah Connors. You pick. Several years later, the military went, oops, we really need that capability, and paid for its development a second time. Our tax dollars at work. The point of the story is that some functions like gates and self-righting can be handled by the robot in a dumb, pre-programmed way that is actually pretty smart. And there is no danger of that pre-programming leading to a robot rebellion. But back to the book. What is it with exoskeleton and giant piloted manga series? Why do they have to end so badly? Sleeping Giant was remarkable. Waking Gods had a nice reveal. And Only Human had nothing. Pacific Rim was silly but fun, while Pacific Rim Uprising, well, it was. My recommendation, definitely read the Themis Files, but stop at reading the series at Waking Gods and skip Only Human.